Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to cover episodes 822 through 824, which will cover manga chapters 854 and most of 856. And here we have Sanji and Luffy trying to make their way back to each other, but can they reach each other in time? And also, Brook finally has his moment to really shine. Alright, so synopsis. Luffy is fighting to make his way back to the spot he promised Sanji he'd be at, while Sanji himself is also desperately trying to get his way back to Luffy as well. But at the same time, the rest of the crew are working to try and figure out how to get Brook rescued from Big Mom's clutches. Alright, so yeah, like all the other episodes, there are quite a few differences because, Whole Cake Island. So episode 822 includes more scenes of Luffy fighting the chest soldiers while Sanji is contemplating what he wants to do. In the manga, we only see what is happening with Sanji and nothing to do with Luffy. Now, near the beginning of episode 823, the anime includes scenes leading up to the group finding the mirror that leads to Big Mom's room, where Brook is being kept. In the manga, the scene begins where they've already found the mirror, and they're kind of in a bit of a shock at the situation that Brook has found themselves in. Additionally, during the scene where each of the Straw Hats attempt to swap Brook out with the decoy Brook, everyone's attempts are drawn out a lot more in the anime. So for Chopper, they add him almost tripping and initially stopping the sneeze that he does, but ultimately he does sneeze, while the manga just has him just sneeze randomly, and that's it, and that ruins his attempt. On Carrot's attempt, they added this funny bit where in order to fool Zeus, she kind of curls up and pretends to be a bunny stuffed animal, but then accidentally kicks a pebble, while the manga only has the bit where she's hit by Big Mom's snot bubble and then is immediately attacked by Zeus. For Pedro's attempt, the anime adds him imagining how he's going to do it to kind of visualize his success, but in the manga, Big Mom just kind of immediately rolls over on his attempt, so none of that happens as well. Additionally, at the end of episode 823, there's added scenes of Luffy trying to get back to the promised spot to meet Sanji. In fact, Luffy fighting Counter, the last of Opera's brothers, is never mentioned in the manga. Not only that, but they really drag out Luffy getting back to that spot. Something like this is implied to have happened off screen because in the manga we see the aftermath of Luffy making his way to that spot from Sanji's perspective, but the manga doesn't actually show us Luffy's perspective, and we don't even see Luffy until that shocking reveal of Luffy kind of all emaciated and withered away, propped up against the remains of King Bomb's tree. The anime also shows Bobbin getting shot by someone mysterious, and we can't really see who that is. In the manga, we don't actually see this, and Oda kind of leaves it up to you to kind of put the pieces together, as we see a page where a couple of people talk about how one of them heard a gunshot, but the other one didn't, and then we see Bobbin really bleeding out and struggling before passing out, while kind of seeing these three silhouettes kind of looking over him. And you can put it together in the manga as well, but the anime adding that gunshot really kind of confirms what happens to Bobbin. And then lastly, there are a few far more scenes of Sanji looking through the wake of Luffy's sort of quest to get back to that spot. In the manga, there's probably only, I think, about 2 or 3 panels of this, of Sanji kind of looking through the bodies and trying to figure out where Luffy is. Alright, so now with the differences out of the way, let's get into the episodes themselves. To start these episodes off, we pick up in the Mirror World, where we finally get an explanation as to how Jinbei avoided the roulette. The explanation was actually far simpler than I would have ever thought. He just refused. That thought never even occurred to me, and probably no one else I would have to think. That then begs the question, did he just tell Big Mom that he didn't want to quit the official way and then just decided to quit anyways? And that's the part that was still unclear at this point. But regardless, we know Jinbei is going to go with the Straw Hats in the end, so he's going to leave somehow. And based on what Jinbei says here, that he wanted to leave with honor, but only sensed malice and death, he decided against it, and is choosing the path of betrayal, which Brule and Pedro both pretty much confirm that was the right decision, because there was really no way out of that. And playing Big Mom's game is a losing battle no matter what. Which, if that's the case, then yeah, screw her. Like, there's no need to be honorable about that. But yeah, speaking of Big Mom, she's now completely enamored with Brook. And the funny thing is, the way Big Mom has Brook dressed with that cloak draped and has him kind of swinging and hanging with that rope makes him kind of look like a Japanese teruteru bozu, which translates to like a shine monk. Traditionally, you would make one of these little dolls and hang them outside of your window to kind of wish and hope for sunny weather the next day. So I just found that really funny to see him looking like that. And if you look up what a teruteru bozu doll looks like, you'll see what I'm talking about. The scene, though, starts off with surprisingly Prometheus showing that he's taken damage from Brook's attack when he was sliced through in his cheek. And it still hasn't healed to the point where he has to put a bandage on there, which I don't even know how a bandage survives on the surface of a sun, but it does. So even though Brook can't quite take them, his soul solid powers can still damage the homies, even made from Big Mom's soul. And as I mentioned in the last podcast episode, this fight was not shown in the manga, so this is just a development we're told of in the manga, while the anime actually showed this interaction and included the moment where Brook actually was able to land that slash on Prometheus's face. And so, to that point, I don't mind some of the fillers. I actually liked seeing this, because this was actually kind of, I think, important to show that Brook was able to damage Prometheus, and us being able to see that was nice. The rest of the scene is dedicated to Pudding and Big Mom discussing the plan for the wedding to kill Sanji and the Vinsmokes, and to have Brook hear this. This naturally confuses and alarms Brook, as he's the only one that has no idea what's really going on in the bigger picture at this point. The Charlotte family are then seen assessing the situation surrounding the Straw Hats, and they believe that Pedro is dead after seemingly blowing himself up. They know that Brook is with Big Mom herself, which is true. However, they still think that Carrot and Chopper are captive to Brule, which they're not. And Mondor and the others have heard rumors that despite being locked away in the library prison, Luffy and Nami have broken out thanks to Jinbei, and many of them stay silent. And when he questions Opera, the lone guard who knows what actually happened, instead of reporting the truth that Jinbei did in fact betray them and freed Luffy and Nami, he denies it for fear of punishment, and so they all believe that the threat is dealt with. But then you get the other issue with this is Mondor expresses his distrust of Opera, creating this kind of uneasy tension among the Charlotte family. And herein lies the biggest issue with crews like Big Mom's Pirates. One that has a leadership style and culture based on fear and intimidation is not a great recipe for success. You breed what is sometimes referred to as like a culture of silence, where people are afraid to speak up for fear of punishment or retribution for making mistakes or wrongdoing or just reporting on things. It breeds an environment and culture where it has unhealthy competition, siloing of information, corruption, and a lack of collaboration and trust. And this is true of any organization, not just fictional pirate crews, but real ones. When this sort of leadership style is implemented, you get this exact type of situation where if there wasn't this overt fear of punishment, people like Opera would have been more willing to speak up and let everyone know that Luffy and Nami did in fact escape, and potentially they would be able to head off this problem before it got worse, which we know it will. I mean, it wasn't even really Opera's fault. Jinbei effectively sucker punched him and knocked him out. On the flip side, when you look at Luffy and the Straw Hats and how they work, they are never afraid to admit that they messed up. But not only that, they trust each other enough that they know if they let their nakama know that they messed up, they will help them correct that mistake. And it makes them stronger, and it allows them to regroup and bounce back a lot more effectively, as well as collaborate and work as a team much more cohesively. The one time this didn't happen, it ended in disaster, and that was during Water 7 when Usopp lost the money to repair the Mary to the Frankie family, and instead of Usopp telling the rest of the crew that he lost the money, not out of fear, but in his case, out of shame, he tried to get the money back by himself, but was severely injured and led the Frankie family and Frankie to make off with the money. And it also drove a huge wedge between the crew. Now, the moral of the story, when you are in a position of leadership, try a more collaborative and supportive culture, because you will have more success, I feel like. Speaking of the Straw Hats, Sanji is still struggling with what he should do, but is still thinking that he should just sacrifice himself along with his family, showing just how lost Sanji is, despite the fact that Reiju has told him that he should go back to the Straw Hats. Despite him mentally trying to convince himself that sacrifice is the right choice and that he is prepared and okay with it, and that's when Bobbin tries to eat the meat, Sanji immediately kicks the living daylights out of him into the wall, almost on instinct, basically showing while his mind is trying to accept it, his heart clearly is not in that place. For me as a reader at the time, and even when I watch and read it now, while I understand and sympathize with Sanji and why he was struggling with this decision, it was still nonetheless incredibly frustrating seeing Sanji still denying his true feelings because it's so clear to everyone else except him. And Sanji cannot get over his self-sacrificial nature because of his overtly kind nature and deep-seated low self-worth he has for himself. He doesn't want to see anyone get hurt on his behalf. In addition to that, since he's grown up being rejected and alone for most of his life, he feels he has to solve everything by himself. And that's why you often see Sanji up till now go off on his own and take on these incredibly dangerous side missions where he goes alone into enemy territory to save his friends and his crew. And we saw that similar things in Little Garden with the Unluckies, Arabasta where he went into the Baroque Works headquarters in Rain Dinner's casino to rescue everyone. He also snuck around on the Arc Maxim to save Nami, and then he snuck onto the Puffing Tom to chase after Robin and Usopp. And then he also goes off by himself in Enies Lobby to open the gates of justice. And more recently, he went back by himself towards the poison gas to rescue Tashigi. All these examples throughout the series was Sanji running off by himself towards danger to help someone. It's not that he doesn't want to work as a team, because we've seen plenty of examples where he does. It's just that when he recognizes something dangerous needs to be done, he doesn't want to put anyone else in danger and never asks for help, and he just kind of does it on his own. Even when he gets destroyed by Khalifa, because he's unable to properly fight her, you never actually see or hear him asking for help, and while he doesn't have a death wish or anything, he would rather sacrifice himself than put someone else in danger on his behalf and ask for someone else to fight Khalifa. But of course, Nami, knowing Sanji really well and just how strong she is, she basically just takes it upon herself, while a little bit annoyed with Sanji, to actually fight Khalifa on his behalf. There's also the aspect of Sanji's sort of deep-seated kindness too that's coming up, is because he expresses to Reiju that he still wants to find some way to save his brothers and father, which is crazy despite the fact that he just loathes them. But his kindness for anyone and everything, it doesn't allow him to just abandon them despite how terrible of people they are and the fact that they probably do deserve to be tricked and killed in this manner. But Sanji cannot bring himself to do that, and I think that's another reason why he's being held back, because as much as he'd want to escape with the Straw Hats, he can't do that because that would mean abandoning his family, even though he hates them. But he can't bring himself to ask Luffy to help him because he doesn't want to put them in danger, so he just constantly has that attitude of where he has to do everything himself, but this is too big. Like he cannot beat Big Mom and her entire army of basically like devil fruit powered super soldiers. It's just not possible, and that's why Sanji is struggling so hard right now. And all of that is coming into play here. It's not that Sanji doesn't have faith in Luffy's ability to face Big Mom, which is something I see some people bring up during all this. It's that he doesn't want to ask for help if it means endangering Luffy and the others on his account. That is what is holding Sanji back, is learning to open up and depend on others, and that he is worth sacrificing for in the eyes of the people that love him, and he cannot seem to get over that. Also, as a segue, can we talk about how Bobbin straight up tanked a rage-filled kick from Sanji and just got up like it was nothing? Like, good lord, this dude is pretty strong, and it makes you realize just how much of a force even the non-sweet general like Big Mom pirates are. Although we do eventually see that he is mysteriously shot by someone in episode 824, Bobbin eventually succumbs to those injuries and collapses. And with that, this is another example of, here Bobbin is his refusal to admit his failure and notify the rest of his crew that Sanji is going rogue and wanting to find Sanji himself, either out of, shame or competitiveness. Because of this, he never gets a chance to warn anyone of what's going on because he passes out before getting the chance to do so. And this, again, will allow Sanji to basically regroup with Luffy and most likely cause a lot of havoc later on. The main Straw Hat group in the mirror world are finally able to track down Brook via the mirrors, but to their horror and shock, it has led them to none other than Big Mom's bedroom, where Brook is seen being cradled by Big Mom as they're both fast asleep. And that moment where she opens her eyes because she notices a fly it's too funny. The way it's depicted from Chopper's point of view, where her eyes are like these two white flashes, is pretty funny and also scary at the same time. But this scene gets even funnier with each added element, as they all relax that she hadn't noticed them, and out of nowhere she swats the fly, but due to her crazy brute strength, she just slams the ground, creating a massive crater in the ground. And it's crazy to me that for us, something as harmless as swatting at a fly is enough to essentially level a small building for Big Mom. And this huge slam causes Brook to awaken momentarily, and just when you think, oh, they got an out and can have him sneak out, he just has the exact same reaction as Big Mom and just goes right back to sleep. But in what reality does Brook wake up to a sound of like a demolition and think, oh, it was just a fly? Like, that's just absurd. But quite possibly my favorite part about this scene happens as the homies, Napoleon, Prometheus, and Zeus all wake up thinking it's an enemy attack, and they go all out on this fly, and it is just hysterical as they realize they're like, when the Straw Hats seeing all three of them attack, that there is no freaking way that they're getting past any of this. I wish that the anime kind of preserved that group shot of them all horrified looking at it. Instead, the anime gives us all these individual close-ups, but in an effort to make up for that, the anime does add a really funny touch that the manga doesn't have, and that was when they showed that scene of Chopper, Carrie, and Nami. Like, you can see their souls leaving their bodies out of their mouths with this ghost like floating through the air. That was genuinely really funny. I thought that was such a really nice touch. So it's definitely a give and take. But yeah, this scene in either version just kills me every time. Just seeing the reactions to all the Straw Hats. It's so funny. But regardless, they have to push on, and given that impossible situation, their plan is to try and replace Brook with a decoy Brook made from a skeleton found in the execution grounds and some seaweed found from the kitchen, and replace them a la Raiders of the Lost Ark. And the implication being that they were able to find all these through the mirrors and go all over the island to find all this material. But I think it's a bit more morbid that they just found some random person's skeleton lying there and just used it as a prop, essentially. Now, the first attempt is made by Chopper, but he sneezes and fails. The next is Carrot, and with her grace, she's able to at least make it to the bed, but she bumps into Big Mom's slumber snot bubble and is again mistaken for a fly, causing Zeus to attack. Now, one thing about this scene that made me realize something is that the characters in universe can see the slumber snot bubble. Like, whenever I've always seen this in manga and anime, I always thought that wasn't actually there, and instead it was more of a visual shorthand to indicate to us, the reader or viewer, that the character is in like a deep slumber, and have it pop to show when they've awoken. Similar to how in American comics, in cartoons, we see like the Z's coming out of the person's head. But at least in the world of One Piece, the snot bubble is actually there and interactable, which I thought was really funny, and I guess kind of makes sense. But the next attempt is by Pedro, but his attempt is thwarted by Big Mom just kind of ill-timed roll over due to just sleeping, movements. However, this rollover fortunately knocks Brook loose out of Big Mom's grasp, and with Nami on her attempt taking this opportunity to make the switch, but in the process of waking Brook up and seeing a skeleton, and his sort of scaredy cat nature came out, and it just spooks the hell out of him and freaks him out, and he just screams now, causing Big Mom to once again think there's a fly, and she unleashes heavenly fire, setting the whole room on fire with Prometheus. Luckily, Jinbei thinks quickly and scoops them both up and gets them back to the safety of the mirror world. And now comes the goosebumps-inducing part. Pedro profusely apologizes to Brook for putting him in essence, essentially an impossible situation with the amount of security surrounding the Poneglyphs and putting his life at risk. But Brook pushes back and says that it was his idea, and it was a necessary idea to seize this rare opportunity to take the Poneglyph rubbing without an all-out war, and then just casually opens up his skull and pulls out this huge stack of papers, which turns out to be the Poneglyph rubbings of not just the road Poneglyph, but all 3 Poneglyphs that Big Mom possesses. And if you're wondering when he was able to do this, he sort of alludes to the fact that this was done in that time while Big Mom was trying to break the door down. And when we see that moment where Big Mom catches him, that wasn't actually before he started trying to do the rubbings. That was in fact after he had already finished. And this was such a badass and boss moment for Brook. Like, I remember when I was reading this at the time of release, I was genuinely shocked he had them, because I was getting all prepared for them to try another attempt with the whole group this time. But the fact that Brook was so casual about it, as he did something that was meant to be almost impossible, was so amazingly cool. I literally got goosebumps reading this chapter. Also, like I've said, I love that Brook continues to finally get the spotlight and some epic moments in this arc. Because, yeah, he has not had too many moments, and so I love that he finally got, his moment to shine here. And this may be Sanji's arc so far, but Brook is coming out the coolest, at least up to this point, because he has been on a crazy run. This also puts his fight with Big Mom into perspective too, because by that point he had already secured the Poneglyph rubbings. He could have just hightailed it out of there and ran, but no, he chose to stay and fight. And that is incredible bravery, and shows that Brook is one of the more dependable Strong Hats. Like, think about it. If that was Zoro, like, he would obviously do the exact same thing. He would stand and fight Big Mom, and we wouldn't really question it. But Brook, for me, in my mind, up to that point at least, he wasn't quite on that level. And so seeing him actually like stand up to Big Mom in that moment, it really changed my sort of perspective on Brook. Like, he's definitely, I think for me, has become one of the more standout, dependable ones in an emergency situation. Not that the other crew members aren't, but like I could easily see like Nami, Chopper, Usopp running, and I always kind of put Brook kind of in that category as well. But I think I'd put him more closer to the stronger side, like Robin, Frankie, and Brook. And yeah, I mean that sort of the older trio or the weird trio, he kind of fits that. Now, before moving on to the final scene of this set of episodes, there's a brief scene with the Vinsmokes where they've been partying and drinking with a bunch of the barmaids, but I feel like there may be an implication that they were doing a bit more than drinking, but if you know what I mean. But this scene is mostly to highlight just how arrogant and ignorant they are, that they're all being prepared for a massacre the next day. Also, I find it funny that not only does Yonji have a thing for Nami, but it turns out it runs in the entire family, and that they all love Nami, with Ichiji and Niji also expressing interest for her as well. And at this point in the story, I didn't want them to die, since Sanji himself didn't want them to die, but I was really hoping that they all get some sort of a humiliating comeuppance, because my god, these people are some of the most disgusting people in the world of One Piece. Like, they have such punchable faces and attitudes too. Especially Judge and Sanji's brothers. I mean, they're all terrible people. But this all leads to Sanji and Luffy both fighting like hell to get back to that promised spot. And there's a really nice scene that parallels the earlier flashback while Sanji was in the Germa Kingdom, where Sanji is running through the rain with the food for his mom and then gets attacked by a dog. But at least this time he's strong enough to not let the dog have its way with the lunch. And this is Oda, of course, telling us that this moment is just as impactful for Sanji and on Sanji as it was with his mother, and that Luffy has kind of become a presence in Sanji's life just as significant as his mother Sora was. And one thing I will say the anime depicts well that the manga couldn't, despite it being, it does drag a little long, but I feel like it was needed. It was showing the growing level of desperation and concern that Sanji had as he moved through the wake of all the battles Luffy had to get through to get back to that spot. And you can tell each time he was getting more and more afraid that Luffy would be one of those among the pile of bodies that he was searching for. And we finally reach that big moment where they finally catch up to each other. And this is such an amazing moment as Sanji is relieved to see that Luffy is still there waiting for him with this sort of smile of relief and happiness, but also this sense of sadness too. However, the shock I felt seeing the state that Luffy was in was much more impactful in the manga, because the way he looks all emaciated and battered was crazy the way Oda drew it and the anime does a good job and it does its best, but I think one area where it has more impact in the manga is just the stark contrast of the black and white. That it really shows Luffy's sort of sunken cheeks and his darkened eyes that you really don't quite get in the anime, because I guess it is harder in the anime, but really thinking about it, like especially when you look at the animation now in the anime, they could have done so much more with the lighting and the colors to make that moment stand out and hit just as hard as it does in the manga. Because when you turn that page and you see the bottom of that page, the bottom half of that last page, it hits you, like just seeing Luffy in that state. And I also think it's kind of ruined by the anime showing so much of Luffy leading up to this. And it kind of loses its impact a bit in that sense, because the manga actually shows very little of Luffy after he jumps out that window. And so we go from seeing him, still relatively normal looking in Reiju's, when he's talking to Reiju and he jumps out the window, to this, just seeing him all just shriveled up and just slumped over on King Bomb's, carcass. And it really just hits you like, what did Luffy have to go through to get here? And I think just leaving that part up to the imagination, it hits a lot harder. And it's more shocking, I think. And so I hate that the anime was forced or chose to add all those scenes of Luffy fighting. Because, yeah, it does take away from it, I think. But nonetheless, this is still an amazingly impactful moment, regardless of the format you see it in. Because yeah, it's such a pivotal moment for the two of them. But with that, we are going to leave it on this massive cliffhanger of what will the reconciliation between Sanji and Luffy look like. However, before we go over that emotional reunion between the two, we will have to take a brief detour and wait an extra week to talk about it, as next episode will be my 300th, and yeah, I'll be doing another special episode to kind of commemorate that, so please look forward to that. And then we'll get back into the main story. So yeah, thanks for listening. If you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. I always appreciate all of that. And check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates when I post new episodes, and to see pictures of my manga and card collection. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. No spoiler section today, but stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!